Hey there, Jeep Divers. Today we're going to take a deep dive into something super relevant, I think. Political authenticity and Black representation. We're going way beyond just like buzzwords, to really break down what they mean, especially in today's landscape.
Yeah, and we're really going deep here. Like, we're going to be looking at a recent article that gets into, like, the nitty-gritty of what makes a Black political leader truly authentic, the unique challenges they face, and how this connects to the bigger picture of representation and social change.
Exactly. You know, it's so interesting because when we talk about political authenticity, let's hear those terms right. Honesty, integrity, relatability. But what I thought was really powerful about this article is how it emphasizes the importance of trust, especially for Black voters, who honestly have a long history of being let down by the political system.
Absolutely. And when we look back at history, especially the period following the Civil Rights era, that need for trustworthy leadership within Black communities, it becomes so clear. Like, think about it. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, huge victory, finally dismantled so many of the barriers that prevented Black citizens from truly having their voices heard. But that was just the beginning, right? Decades of systemic disenfranchisement don't just vanish overnight.
So true. And this is where the concept of cultural resonance comes in.
Right.
The article talks about how it's not enough for a leader to just be well-intentioned. They need to really understand and reflect the lived experiences of the community they represent.
Absolutely. Cultural resonance. It's about way more than just shared demographics. It's about like a deep understanding of a community's history, its values, its struggles, even its humor, speaking the language. Literally and figuratively. A great example is like Barack Obama, often weaving in those references to Black culture, music, and even church traditions in his speeches.
You know, that actually reminds me of a point the article made about how those personal narratives can really resonate with voters. Like Obama's journey, being biracial, raised by a single mother, really resonated with so many people because it felt so authentic and relatable.
Yeah, his ability to connect on that personal level was definitely a factor in his success. And we see this with other leaders as well. Stacey Abrams often talks about her experiences growing up in poverty and how that shaped her commitment to fighting for economic justice. It's not just about like ticking boxes. It's about those lived experiences translating into action.
Totally. Okay, so we've got honesty, integrity, relatability, this idea of cultural resonance. But the article also dives into like the very real obstacles that Black politicians face when trying to just be their authentic selves. It's almost like the system wasn't designed for them to succeed,
Yeah, it's definitely an uphill battle. And the article highlights a few key barriers. First, there's this pressure to conform to mainstream expectations, which can sometimes feel like a demand to tone down their Blackness, to appeal to a wider audience. Then there's the media, which often portrays Black politicians through a very narrow lens, focusing on race-related issues, even when they're not central to their platforms.
It's like they're being pigeonholed, expected to be the voice of an entire race, rather than individuals with, like, diverse perspectives and policy priorities. And I remember the article mentioned that even within Black communities, there can be internal pressures to conform to certain norms or prioritize specific issues.
It's this constant balancing act. On one hand, Black politicians want to represent the unique needs and concerns of their community. But on the other hand, they also want to address those broader societal issues that affect everyone. And sometimes those goals can feel at odds with each other.
Yeah, it's like they're expected to be superhuman, balancing like the weight of historical expectations, media scrutiny, and internal community pressures, all while trying to navigate a system that honestly wasn't built for them.
Right, and that's why it's so important to look at these barriers in a nuanced way. It's not about like pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about understanding that complex reality that Black politicians face, and honestly appreciating the resilience and the strategic brilliance they often have to demonstrate.
You know, speaking of navigating a complex system, I'm really curious about the media's role in all of this. The article dives into how different media platforms, from like traditional news to social media, can really shape public perception.
It's such a fascinating dynamic. The media can be such a powerful tool for amplifying marginalized voices and holding those in power accountable. But it can also perpetuate these harmful stereotypes and create these echo chambers where nuanced conversations get lost.
It's like this constant tug of war between representation and misrepresentation. On one hand, we have Black politicians using platforms like Twitter and Instagram to connect directly with voters, share their unfiltered perspectives, and build grassroots support.
Right. It's a game changer. It allows them to bypass those traditional gatekeepers and really control their own narrative, which is incredibly empowering. But on the flip side, Social media can also be a breeding ground for misinformation and online harassment, which could be particularly brutal for Black politicians.
Yeah, it's almost like a double-edged sword.
Yes.
There's potential for both incredible connection and devastating isolation.
Speaking of connection, the article also talks about how younger generations are kind of demanding something different from their leaders.
They're definitely changing the game. They're digital natives, super comfortable with consuming information from diverse sources, and they're not afraid to call out hypocrisy or demand transparency. They're holding their leaders to a higher standard, which is really pushing the boundaries of what political authenticity even means in the 21st century. And it's not just about words, it's about action. This generation wants to see their values reflected in tangible policy changes.
Right. That's where the real impact lies. It's not enough to just talk about social justice or economic equality. Young voters want to see their leaders fighting for legislation that addresses issues like climate change, student debt relief, and criminal justice reform. They're looking for a commitment to dismantling those systemic barriers and creating a more equitable future.
And it feels like a lot of that energy is coming from these grassroots movements. The article talks about how organizations led by young Black activists are gaining momentum, driving these conversations, and mobilizing communities in a way we haven't really seen in a long time.
Yeah, it's so inspiring to witness. These movements are challenging those traditional power structures, demanding accountability, and creating space for new voices and perspectives to emerge. They're really redefining what it means to engage in the political process, making it more inclusive and accessible.
And that's something the article touches on towards the end, this idea that the future of Black political representation is kind of intrinsically linked to the evolution of political authenticity itself. It's this dynamic, ever-changing process.
Exactly. It's not a destination, it's a journey. And as we move forward, it's going to be so crucial for political parties and institutions to adapt to these evolving expectations. They need to find and support candidates who embody these values, who understand those nuanced needs of their communities, and who are willing to push for bold systemic change.
It feels like such a critical moment. If they fail to adapt, they risk becoming irrelevant, especially the younger voters who are so hungry for authenticity and action. But I'm curious, what concrete changes do you think we might actually see as this shift continues to unfold?
Well, I think we can expect to see a greater emphasis on lived experience and grassroots connections. When it comes to candidate selection, parties will need to look beyond those traditional resumes and consider the lived experiences, community ties, and demonstrated commitment to social justice that candidates bring to the table.
So it's not just about checking boxes, it's about understanding the stories behind those boxes and how they translate into a genuine commitment to serving the community.
Exactly. And we're likely to see a shift in those campaign strategies as well, with a greater emphasis on digital outreach and authentic engagement with voters. It's about moving beyond those scripted sound bites and staged photo ops and fostering genuine dialogue. That resonates with people on a personal level.
It's about meeting people where they are, understanding their concerns, and demonstrating a real willingness to listen and learn. And I'm curious, beyond electoral politics, how do you see this concept of evolving authenticity impacting the broader landscape of Black representation?
I think we can expect to see a continued push for representation across all sectors of society, from media and entertainment to business and academia.
It's about seeing diverse Black faces, hearing diverse Black voices, not just in politics, but in every aspect of our culture. And it's about ensuring that those voices aren't just present, but that they're empowered to shape narratives and influence decision-making.
Right, that's where true representation lies. Not just in visibility, but in agency.
This has been such an insightful conversation, but before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the potential pitfalls of social media. It's such a powerful tool for connection, but it can also be a breeding ground for negativity and misinformation.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for all of us, not just Black politicians, to be mindful of how we engage in those online spaces. It's about being critical consumers of information, fact-checking before we share, and calling out hate speech and misinformation when we see it.
It's about creating a more responsible and equitable digital landscape where those authentic voices can thrive without fear of harassment or distortion. But, it's not just about what we do online. It's about how we engage in our offline communities as well.
That's a crucial point. It's about having those difficult conversations, challenging our own biases, and actively supporting organizations and initiatives that are working to dismantle those systemic barriers.
It's about showing up, speaking out, and being allies in the fight for a more just and equitable future. It's about remembering that political authenticity isn't just a concept we discuss. It's a value we embody in our everyday lives. As we kind of wrap up this deep dive, it really strikes me that political authenticity, it isn't just about individual politicians or even specific policies. It's really about creating a culture where authenticity is valued and nurtured.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's about shifting the very foundation of our political system, moving away from this culture of performative politics and towards a system that prioritizes genuine connection, transparency, and accountability.
And that requires a collective effort, right? It's not just about who we vote for. It's about how we engage in our communities, how we hold our leaders accountable, and how we support those organizations and movements that are really pushing for change.
It's about recognizing that each of us has a role to play in shaping a more authentic and equitable political landscape. It starts with those everyday conversations, challenging our own biases and educating ourselves on the issues that matter most.
And it extends to supporting those organizations that are doing the groundwork, advocating for policies that promote equity, and holding our elected officials accountable for their actions and their words.
It's about creating this ripple effect where those individual actions contribute to a larger wave of change that ultimately transforms the system itself.
This deep dive has been so thought-provoking. But before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. We've talked a lot about the challenges and barriers that Black politicians face when it comes to authenticity. But what about the flip side? What can we as individuals do to support and encourage the emergence of more authentic leadership, not just within Black communities, but across the board?
That's such a crucial question. It's not enough to just critique the system.
Yeah.
We need to be actively engaged in building a better one. And that starts with being more discerning, consumers of information.
Right. It's about questioning the narratives we're presented with, seeking out diverse perspectives, and supporting those media outlets and platforms that prioritize ethical and nuanced reporting.
And it's about being more intentional about the leaders we choose to follow and support, looking beyond that superficial charisma and focusing on those who demonstrate a genuine commitment to their communities and to creating a more just and equitable world.
It's about recognizing that true leadership isn't about power or popularity. It's about service, integrity, and a willingness to use your platform to uplift others and fight for what's right.
And it's about recognizing that those qualities aren't confined to any one race, gender, or background. We need authentic leadership across all sectors of society if we truly want to create a world that reflects our shared values of justice, equity, and opportunity for all.
This has been such a fantastic deep dive into a topic that's both timely and timeless. Huge thanks to you for sharing your insights and expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all of you deep divers out there, keep questioning, keep learning, keep engaging. And as always, thanks for joining us on this journey.